do this on the 9th of December, and we're talking just a couple weeks away. So we may discover things at that meeting that we weren't even thinking of. And that's why, you know, good community dialogue can make better policy, I think, in the long run, compared to us saying, here's our ordinance policy, we'd like to just have you put it into place. We might learn a lot that we could actually have a better policy that would work in this community from that dialogue.
You know, just from, the police would be very reticent, I think, to take on anybody else's enforcement. And part of that is, once you accept the responsibility and you've arrested somebody, you have to pay for their incarceration. And right now, in Clay County, we incarcerate people that we don't get reimbursed for. The state, they're actually state prisoners, and we aren't getting paid for that. So it is messing up everybody's budgets. So already the local law enforcement people are very, very careful about what their jurisdictions are, because it's money tax.
And would that set a precedent if local law enforcement enforced federal law that they would be expected to continue to do so?
And we're still waiting for we're waiting for the FEMA money now from the flood. So, no, yeah, scary.
I'm sorry, I should clarify. At any point, does this involve interacting with this federal agency, or is it just about setting up a local?
Local.
Okay.
And we're not encouraging even to bring much up about the federal agencies. We looked at the 287G determination just because we need to know about it. And we had that at our meetings, but I told the people doing that research, don't bring that up unless it comes up. Of course it came up. So I think that we have to be looking at that, but we don't envision having INS or any of those folks at the table when we talk about this.
And that you shouldn't need them either, right? I mean, if you clearly set down what the parameters are here locally and what the separation of powers is, it really shouldn't need to involve.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And you know, law enforcement's going to have their involvement with those agencies, and they do, because they do interact. But I think that this will start with the community level first and our local law enforcement, and then they'll have to work out their working relationship.
Is there a policy or a law that says local law enforcement is supposed to enforce immigration?
It's at 287. I'm trying to remember that's part of the Homeland Security Act. And it's something that, I don't know how that gets enacted, but it hasn't been enacted by any law enforcement agency in North Dakota or Minnesota. It hasn't happened here in these communities. But there is a provision, I think it's the Homeland Security Act, that actually has ICE deputizing law enforcement to do their work, to do exactly the opposite of this, that they do ask about citizenship status, that they do the work of the federal government.
Does that basically educate law enforcement on how to appropriately profile?
No, in fact, it's big criticism about that is it doesn't. There is no training. There is no expectation. It's just something on paper. And that's why there's a lot of trouble in communities where law enforcement is taking on these issues because they aren't equipped to do it. It's created a lot of liability for law enforcement because they're doing it really wrong. And you know, from our standpoint, it's just a violation of people. You know, it's like we come from a whole different angle, but if it takes that it's a money issue that prevents law enforcement from taking this on, then we have a policy that has separation of power. And that just means different things for different communities. And you know, we're concerned for people's privacy, and we're concerned about police involvement beyond what they should be involved in.
So one of the favorable outcomes, according to us, would be to basically empower our own local law enforcement people to be strong in what they believe is their appropriate job.
Exactly.
Because actually, if the feds came in and said, do this, they would have to have a very strong belief that it was not okay. And if, in fact, an ordinance is passed, it would undergird them. Not that we couldn't be overridden, but I'm sure we could.
I'm sure we could be overridden by federal legislation.
Sure.
But I think that is probably the minimum that it would take to override us. But I think you're right that law enforcement would be strengthened by having a formal policy in place that they could fall back on and say, no, this is clearly against city police department, local sheriff department, whatever, is clearly against policy.
Aside from the cost benefit of not having to take the training, not having to house the criminal, I see here that there's like an erroneous charge on an individual in Arizona. How does that help the $35 million lawsuit if it continues to happen here in our community? Say an officer, after we have an ordinance, decides to call INS and somebody's detained. How does that protect us against a $35 million lawsuit?
I don't know, you know, it's, part of it is that when we do issues like this, it's creating an expectation in our community that we're going to treat people well. And that also that idea that law enforcement will do their best to do what their job is. And when people act outside those parameters, I believe that if we have a strong effort to put something in place, there's accountability. So if people stray from what they're supposed to do, they can be held accountable for.
So the officer would be held accountable?
That's what I see, because if the whole department is taking a stand and we do it this way, and someone acts outside that parameter, then it's back to an individual in that institution that's not, you know, playing by the rules, and then they're held accountable. We're hoping this creates an accountability that won't happen, that people won't stray from that, because we've created a very visible public way of looking at this as important in our community, and that we create that sort of standard.
It certainly sounds like a human rights kind of an issue, considering it affects protected classes, race, ethnicity. I'm certainly interested in it, but of course I'm also, my second hat is as an organizer with people escaping poverty, and my third hat, I guess, that was put on me was being brown. I didn't pick that hat. But certainly, if that issue.
He is a Norwegian.
As a Norwegian, you get profiled in Mexico. I'm going to try and sell you something for a little bit more than what it costs.
I'm gonna get sold chiclets for $2 pesos.
But I'll certainly be at that meeting as well. I'm glad to see that the commission's interested in at least the first segment of it. I'll get the information out to folks on the 9th. And if there's nothing else, I'm thanking you for presenting here tonight.
And thank you. And again, just the dialogue here tonight is very important. That's what we hope to accomplish when we get you and other community members together with law enforcement we'll have some really strong facilitators and moderators that will help us be heard in the room. And it's that sort of dialogue that I think can forge a really good working relationship, because then we'll understand the different angles that people are working from and have a better community because of it. So thanks for hearing us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
We did do kind of some reports.